What's going on, everybody? Kalipis Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, I'm going to be giving you some of my favorite and least favorite things about the Google Pixel 6a. Now before we go any further, as always, I do want to remind you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and in case you want to learn more about this phone, I have made a bunch of other videos about it, which I will be linking to in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and my favorite accessories for it. So if you're interested, definitely check that out. But otherwise, let's get started. So my first pro for the Google Pixel 6a is the camera. Now this phone really does have an amazing camera. Whether you're coming from more of a budget phone or something like an older flagship phone, no matter what the case may be, I'm sure you will end up being at least decently impressed with this phone's camera. Now the actual hardware on this camera setup is pretty simple, with an 8 megapixel selfie camera in the front and a basic dual camera setup on the back, consisting of a 12.2 megapixel main camera and a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera. But don't let the simple setup fool you, because not only does the Google Pixel 6a have really good photo quality, but despite not having stuff like a telephoto lens or dedicated macro camera, this phone still has really good zoom, and it can still easily get those close-up detailed images you usually get with a macro camera. As you can see here, this is pretty much the same kind of picture you would normally get with the macro camera, but I actually did take this in the normal camera mode with the Google Pixel 6a, pretty much just put the phone close to the subject and zoomed in a little, and I'm definitely happy with the results. Normal photos with this phone also tend to come out really well. The ultra wide camera is great with minimal distortion. The selfie camera is really good, especially in portrait mode, and you can even get some really nice photos in low lighting. Now if you want to see a more detailed review of the camera, I do have a dedicated camera review for this phone, which I will be linking to in the description, but you probably get the picture, no pun intended. The Google Pixel 6a really has a simple but strong camera setup, so if you're taking a lot of photos and camera quality is really important to you, then it's definitely going to be a great option. My second pro for the Google Pixel 6a is the overall design. Now this phone may not be anything extravagant, but in general it is really well designed, with a nice sleek, modern, recognizable look, high quality premium materials, good build quality, and a nice amount of weight to it. You can tell just by holding it that this is a higher end device, and while maybe not being quite as recognizable as an iPhone for example, I definitely think Google Pixel phones nowadays have a pretty unique look, especially compared to something like a Samsung Galaxy S21 FE for example that looks a lot more generic. My third pro for the Google Pixel 6a is the processor. With 6GB of RAM in the Google Tensor processor, you can definitely expect really high performance here. Sure, on one hand, you will see a little bit of a difference between this phone and something like the Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra for example, but in general, I would say in terms of overall levels, the Google Pixel 6a is definitely at the top when it comes to processing power. I've done pretty much everything on this phone, from web browsing, social media, mobile gaming, streaming content like videos and music, and I haven't had any performance issues whatsoever. Everything has run really smoothly, and I have no complaints at all. Now, if you're coming from another flagship phone, honestly, in 2022, when it comes to these higher end devices, we're at a point where you're not going to see an insane difference from one phone to another. But that being said, if you're coming from more of a mid-range phone like the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G or the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G, you will see a solid performance upgrade. And if you're doing higher performance activities like mobile gaming, or you're just going to be on your phone a lot, then this is definitely going to be a great option, because while it does have really good performance, the Google Pixel 6a is also not nearly as expensive as something like a Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra. Now, in case you're wondering, here are the Geekbench 5 scores for this phone. What I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone and comparing your results to these, and that's going to give you a better idea of whether or not this phone is really going to be a solid upgrade for you. Because on one hand, if you're coming from more of a mid-range phone, then I would definitely say it will be a significant upgrade, but on the other hand, if you're coming from something like a Samsung Galaxy S21 for example, then it's definitely going to be a different story. But again, in general, I am really impressed with the processor on this phone, and if you're looking for good performance, you're not going to go wrong with it. My fourth pro for the Google Pixel 6a is the battery. Now with this phone, we're getting a 4,410 mAh battery that supports 18-watt fast charging. And at first, if you're coming from more of a mid-range phone, since those phones that are slightly lower end than this tend to have 5,000 mAh batteries, this really might not seem very impressive, but this battery is actually surprisingly well optimized, and in my experience, the battery life is actually really good. Another thing to keep in mind is that a lot of flagship phones don't tend to have the biggest batteries out there. Like for example, the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE actually has a 4,500 mAh battery, so the difference there really isn't that much, and for that matter, the latest version of the iPhone SE actually has around a 2,400 mAh battery. So as you can see, when it comes to entry-level flagship phones, it can definitely get worse. From my experience, overall, no matter what you're doing on this phone, you can definitely expect it to last at least a day. And another good thing about this battery is that with the 18-watt fast charging, while it's not the strongest fast charging in the world, it definitely does get the job done, and the charging speeds with this phone are really good. And my fifth pro for the Google Pixel 6a is the software. Being a Google phone, the Android skin is going to be one of the smoothest there is. The phone itself is really well optimized for features like the Google Assistant, and as far as software support goes, this generation of Google Pixel phones is going to get at least 5 years of support. So if getting the latest version of Android as it comes out is important to you, a Google phone is really one of the best possible options. But now that we've gone over some of the good things about this phone, let's talk about some of the potential drawbacks. Now be warned, these are a little nitpicky, and if you find them a little silly and irrelevant, then that's probably a sign that this is going to be a good phone for you. But with that being said, my first con for the Google Pixel 6a is that it can only record 4K videos in the rear camera and not the front. Now to be fair, we can record at a nice 4K at 60 frames per second in the rear camera, and I feel like for most people, this is going to be plenty good enough. But if you are recording a lot of videos, especially for something like a vlog for example, where you might be using the selfie camera a lot, this could be a problem, and it's really too bad because when it comes to video, this phone is really good, the image quality is great, and even the audio quality is good. So if you are doing something like a vlog for example, where you do need to use the selfie camera, then this could definitely be a problem. But then again, it really just depends on whether or not you're actually going to be recording in 4K or just 1080p, because even for me personally for this channel, I want to say 99.9% of my videos are in 1080p and not 4K. So again, it really just depends on what kind of videos you're making, because even for content creators, not everyone is going to be recording in 4K anyway. But if you do record in 4K, just keep in mind, again, the Google Pixel 6a can record 4K in the rear camera, but not the front. My second con for the Google Pixel 6a is that it doesn't have Face Unlock. Now this is a really minor thing, but just kind of the principle of it. I mean, this is really an entry-level flagship phone, and I said the same thing about the iPhone SE and even just regular iPhones for that matter. I mean, you can find a $75 prepaid phone that has both a fingerprint scanner and Face Unlock, yet these higher end phones that are approaching $1,000 and even above $1,000 in the case of some iPhones can only manage to have one or the other. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me, and I mean, look at Samsung. The Samsung Galaxy S21 FE does have both a fingerprint scanner and Face Unlock, and seeing that some really cheap phones have both, it can't be that expensive to implement. So honestly, there's really no excuse for these higher end phones not to have both. But that being said, to be fair, at least we do get a fingerprint scanner here, and it's a really nice in-display fingerprint scanner that in my opinion works really well, and I feel like on average most people do seem to prefer fingerprint scanners over Face Unlock. So I want to say for the vast majority of people who get this phone, it's probably not going to be that big a deal. But again, keep in mind, if you do like Face Unlock, unfortunately this phone doesn't have it. My third con for the Google Pixel 6a is that it doesn't have wireless charging. This is another one of those things that's a little weird to me because the vast majority of phones in this price range do have wireless charging. For example, the iPhone SE, which in my opinion is not anywhere near as good as this phone, still has wireless charging. The Samsung Galaxy S21 FE has it, and even a small handful of really low-end phones like the Visible Midnight and the Cricket Dream 5G still do have it, which granted, that's not really expected, but for a phone in this price range, the Google Pixel 6a, while not being the top of the line, is still technically a flagship phone. And in 2022, I feel like there are certain features that all flagship phones should have, and wireless charging is definitely one of them. Now another thing to keep in mind here is that it's not really necessarily about how useful wireless charging is, because while I personally do really like it, I know a lot of people don't really care about it, but regardless of whether or not you actually use wireless charging, it's more about the principle of it. If Google's actually going to be selling a phone in this price range, I feel like there are some basic features every phone like this should have, and since unfortunately this phone doesn't have wireless charging, it may not give you quite as much value for the money as say a Samsung Galaxy S21 FE for example that does have wireless charging. My fourth con for the Google Pixel 6a is that it doesn't have microSD card expansion. Now this is actually not uncommon for a flagship phone. In fact, I don't think any of them actually do have microSD card expansion, but the problem with this phone is that it only has one variant with 128 gigabytes of internal storage, and there's really nothing else. On one hand, for average users, this is going to be perfectly fine, but if you're more of a power user, if you have a lot of apps and stuff like that, and you're really just doing a lot on your phone, you could fill up this space a lot faster than you might think. And again, for the average user, the storage on this phone is going to be plenty, but I feel like a lot of people who get this phone are going to be power users, and if you do have a lot of stuff on your phone, having neither microSD card expansion nor another variant with more internal storage is definitely a big drawback. And my fifth and final con for the Google Pixel 6a is that it doesn't have a headphone jack. Now, I'm personally not very surprised or even bothered by this. For that matter, I don't even remember the last flagship phone that did have a headphone jack. But as a warning for those of you who currently have a mid-range phone, most of which do have headphone jacks, and are considering upgrading to a higher-end device, keep in mind, neither the Google Pixel 6a nor really any other higher-end device like this is going to have a 3.5mm headphone jack. But those were my pros and cons for the Google Pixel 6a. In general, despite having a few drawbacks and being a little bit more on the pricey side, this really is a great device. And if you're looking for a high performance phone with a great camera and overall really good quality, then I would say you're not going to go wrong with the Google Pixel 6a. Once again, if you want to learn more about this phone, I have made a lot of videos about it, which I will be linking to in the video description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and my favorite accessories for it. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipus Tech on Twitter and Instagram, and as always, I will see you in the next video.